Forget. Awesome. So Melissa, if you would not mind introducing yourself, and I'm going to mute myself. That'd be great.
Great. Well, good evening, everyone. And let me just start by saying thank you. I know carving out time in an evening, a Thursday evening in particular, can be difficult. So I appreciate you making time to be here this evening. And I actually have a quick question, Kate. I should know the answer to this, but when you talk about regions, are they based on, is it a map that you created, or is it a map that ties in with our court districts, or how does that work, if I can ask?
So we follow the child welfare regions. So there's 7 different regions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Makes sense. Great.
if you see region 3 or region 5, region 7, things like that in the chat, it's based off of that. We
Okay,
follow this.
okay. That's helpful. Thank you. So I do have a PowerPoint I'm going to share with folks, but I'm going to do what I do with every single group I speak to, is if you have the ability and you're willing to turn on your camera and just do a little wave or a smile or a thumbs up. I don't know about you, but I feel like we're still talking to way too many screens these days. I met someone today for the first time. I've only seen her in a little box, so it was nice to see a 3D person. So if you could do a quick wave, a quick smile, even if you can't turn your camera on or you don't feel comfortable, still do it, because I can feel that through the computer, right? Like folks are still on board. I know I'm actually talking to people, not just screens and little boxes. So great. Okay, so I am going to do a share screen. My name is Melissa Radcliffe, and I do run a program called Our Children's Place. We're part of Coastal Horizons, and I'll give you a little bit more information on that in just a second. So hold on just 1 minute, and we will get things started. And can someone just give me a thumbs up that you can actually see the PowerPoint? Perfect. Okay. And happy to make it available to Kate to share with the group afterwards. I feel like we've got a lot of really good information in here, but it can be a lot of really good information. And so I'm trying to recognize that sometimes folks need to see it on the screen and talk about it, but then also look at it afterwards. So happy to make it available to folks afterwards. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items. So I'm coming to this from an advocacy perspective, not a clinical perspective. So I'm not coming to you as a social worker or mental health professional. I'm coming to you as an advocate. And I love talking to a group like this because it means I'm talking to a group of advocates, right? Whether you or not you identify as an advocate, you clearly advocate for the well-being of children. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is put on that advocacy hat, either literally or pretend, but to add a piece to it. And it's thinking about children who have that incarcerated or returning parent. So how do we advocate for what it is that they need? The other thing is that I always think of this as the start of the conversation, but not the end. I feel very fortunate that we have a little chunk of time here this evening, but this is a big topic. And so if there's interest in continuing the conversation, either as a group, small group, individually, any or all of those, let me know. I don't want you to think that when we log off that that's the end, right? We're done. We can move on. If you want to have an ongoing conversation, if you have questions, you need some more information, I hope we can continue the conversation. The other piece of this is I'm at a disadvantage. I mean, I've seen all of your information in the chat. I've seen some of your faces, but except for Kate, I don't think I know any of you. And so I just do a little self-care reminder that because I don't know any of you, I don't know any of your stories. I don't know anything of what you've experienced, what you're experiencing now. So just to do a little bit of self-care in terms of statistically, even in a small but mighty group like this one this evening, someone has had lived experience with parental incarceration. Sometimes people say that was my situation growing up. Some people say that's my situation right now. I'm an adult child. Others say I'm caring for a child. Some people say I know what's going on in my family and I anticipate this is what we might be facing in the future. So not that anybody ever forgets that, but I think sometimes when people come to professional development opportunities, they put that aside because they're wearing a different hat. So if you need to log off, turn your camera off, please do that. Please take care of yourself. I hope you'll come back. I've had folks virtually doing a webinar or in person say, I need to take a break. I'm going to come back, but I need to do a little bit of self-care for just a few minutes. So there's a group that meets in Europe. They do an annual conference, and I always joke that the best I'm ever going to get is to see the cool pictures at the end, because I don't know about any of you, but my work travel budget does not include going to Europe for a conference. And I tried, not in 2023, but in 2022, the conference is in Portugal in June. And my boss had just announced that she was going to be retiring. So I thought she's an easy sell, right? I'm going to just forward the conference information, make my case about why I should go, great networking, learn from people. And I had my whole bullet list ready to go, sent it off to her, and her response was swift and short. It was LOL immediately, end of conversation. So I did not go to Portugal for that conference. But the reason I bring that up is that group has, again, annual conference, but several years ago, as part of that conference planning, they created a tagline. And they share it when they send out their conference information, but they also send it out with various other emails. And the tagline for that group, I think, for me, is a really good opportunity to just pause for a minute and think about children who have an incarcerated or returning parent. So that group in Europe, that one with the conference that I'll probably never go to, their tagline is "Not my crime, still my sentence." Not my crime, still my sentence. The reality is children of incarcerated parents weren't arrested. They didn't go before a magistrate. They didn't have a pretrial conference. They didn't hire a defense attorney. They weren't assigned a public defender. They didn't go through numerous court hearings. They weren't convicted by a judge or jury, and they weren't sentenced. Yet what many of them experience is just what it says on the screen, that invisible sentence, the one we can't talk about, we don't know how to talk about, or we refuse to talk about. So part of our job with our Children's Place is to say, how do we make that sentence more visible so that people can appreciate the fact that children did not do the crime, but in fact are doing the time along with their parents? Not my crime, still my sentence. So I'll share that a couple of other times this evening. I, again, pointed out as an opportunity to just pause for a minute, but I also pointed out because we're strangers. I'm not going to ask you for a show of hands, at least not right now. But my guess is that there are times when parents drive you crazy, right? You just think, oh my gosh, you keep making bad choices. Why can't you get act together? You're just not on the right path. And we may or may not say those things, but I want us to think about separating for a bit and saying, but what is it the kids need? We have to talk about the parents at some point, right? At some point they traveled as a team, but to think about what it is the kids need and how we can meet their needs, putting aside our thoughts about the parents. Not my crime, still my sentence. So you actually have a homework assignment this evening, and Kate knows I do this for every group that I speak to. So while I always say you're a special group, you're not special because everybody gets this homework assignment. What I will say to you is that it's not traditional homework. I don't need for you to turn it in. And in fact, I would prefer that you didn't turn it in because I know what happens when people turn in their homework. It usually means they're giving me something to do, which is probably how I ended up with Gail to start with. She went to a workshop and suddenly she was giving me a homework assignment. So I want you to think about taking action, right? We have a chunk of time here this evening. I'm going to give you a lot of good information, but then I want to think about how do we act on it. So it's not just we log off at 8:30. Okay, we're done. But are there some things we can do about it? Now, it says 4 in the next week, and you might be shaking your head saying, no, you can't add 4 things to my plate for the next week. So modify that. Is there one thing you could do by the end of March, 2 things by the end of June, 3 over the summer, and think about what works for you. Now, as you can see, I did the first one for you already. Hopefully nobody's on Facebook or Twitter or X or any of them right now. But I post every time I come to speak to a group. So I posted, I think last week that I would be here tonight. I also post if there's some new research that's been published, a new book's been printed. And I also post around what I call hallmark moments. So I posted yesterday about Valentine's Day as a way to just say, hey, we're thinking about flowers and gifts and chocolate and stuffed animals. And sometimes we're thinking really about partners, but I'm thinking about love between kids and their incarcerated parents. And are we doing enough to support that? So I post around Valentine's Day, soon it'll be Mother's Day, Father's Day, back to school, Halloween, as a reminder to us that those days happen regardless of whether you have an incarcerated parent or not, right? Hallmark wants you to buy cards regardless of what's going on. So thinking about what those days look like for kids. So I might have a chance to stop once or twice and ask if anyone would like to share their homework. I'm going to assume this is not a shy group, so I don't want silence, right? Somebody, I'm sure, has some homework they want to share. Little stapler is just a reminder to you that a reminder for me to tell you that I have a ton of handouts. I'm going to reference some of them here tonight, but I have a lot of others that I don't. So if there's something in particular you're looking for, if you thought, oh, this is a piece of it that we didn't talk about, I'd like more information, definitely let me know. And my contact information will be on a couple of slides. And then probably the most important graphic on this slide, if not the entire PowerPoint, is the chocolate. Now, we have a little bit of an issue here tonight because we are not in person. And if we were in person, I'd have a bag of chocolate, and our collective homework would be for me to leave with an empty bag. I want to leave with the bag, but the bag to be empty. So what I found is that virtual chocolate is great from a calorie perspective because there are no calories, but from a taste perspective, there's also no taste. So what I've been saying to folks is we are going to do this virtually. So when, not if, when I see you in the community, put your hand out and I'd be happy to have you cash in for chocolate. So I'll just put that there. We're going to do that collective homework a little differently. So when you see me, put your hand out. I'm happy to give you some candy. So our children's place, we are based in Durham, which is why the Durham Bulls logo is there for anyone who is a minor league baseball fan. We do work statewide, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. And as I mentioned, we are part of Coastal Horizons. Some of you may be familiar with Coastal, very large social services agency based in Wilmington. We are part of the Justice Services Department, and our focus is on children of incarcerated and returning parents. And really, our focus is on how communities can support children of incarcerated and returning parents. And just like the group in Europe was very deliberate in their wording for their tagline, we were very deliberate several years ago and added "and returning," because we want to think about children along a continuum. Children whose parents were arrested, possibly went to jail, possibly went to prison, and then are being released. And we know in some cases being released means coming back to live with a child, but in other cases, it may be going to live somewhere else temporarily or permanently, or it may be the parent never lived with the child to start with. So being really broad in our definition of reentry. So thinking about how communities can support them. So we're thinking about how communities can recognize that they have children of incarcerated and returning parents, moving away from, oh, well, not in my community, instead saying we all have them. Recognize supported rather than shamed and stigmatized. So I think about how do we increase support? How do we decrease shame and stigma? And I'm convinced that one of the biggest ways we can start to reduce that shame and stigma is our willingness to talk about it, is our willingness to say, this is what's going on. I won't ask for a show of hands, but the first time I ever spoke to foster families was here in Durham a number of years ago. And what I heard during that presentation afterwards was, I wish someone had talked to us before this, that instead we found we had a child we were caring for, and then we learned just by accident, somebody sort of snuck it into conversation, the child disclosed, we wish we had known earlier. So really thinking about how do we start the conversation so that we can start to increase support. So recognized, supported rather than shamed and stigmatized, and encouraged to share their stories. The reality is I am not an expert on children of incarcerated parents. The experts are the children of incarcerated parents. So do we ask them, do we invite them, do we encourage them? Sometimes do we even challenge them to tell us what's going on, to share their story, to help us understand, to let us know what it means to them to have an incarcerated parent, what they want us to know about that experience. So thinking about how we do that within communities. So I spent a lot of my time doing this, is educating professionals, and my definition of professionals is pretty broad. So it's folks who get paid, maybe not enough, but get paid, volunteer professionals, professionals who are retired, and then students who for me are professionals in training. So thinking about all those folks. And what I always say is I'm not telling anyone how to do their job. I'm simply saying I want to make sure that anyone who's supporting children has some resources, a place to turn, some information, some good printouts and handouts and access to websites. So thinking about that. So this might be a homework assignment for you. So if you click on the link where it says invite us, it's going to take you to a map on our website. I call it our Where's Waldo map. So we've colored in every county that we've done a professional workshop in. So if you look at that map and your county's not colored in, and we've got a number of counties here tonight, figure out how to invite us in, whether that's in person, virtual, hybrid. Now, if you look at the map and think, well, my county's already colored in, still invite us. It's probably been a while. We're probably due to come back. And then think about who would be in that audience. We also spend part of our time looking at how do we support relationships between children and incarcerated parents. The way this is happening two ways right now is that we are back hosting Parent Day at some of our prisons. We have 3 scheduled for the spring, first one at the end of March. So those are extended visits for children. They come in usually for a 4-hour visit. We bring in arts and crafts and lunch and a photographer and board games. And kids get to spend that more quality, longer period of time with their parents. In particular, we seem to be focused on parents who are close to being released. We don't exclude other parents, but oftentimes that's what it's like as they're starting to think about being back in their children's lives. The other piece of this is that we are working on a grant that has us at 5 prisons. So doing parenting there and connecting families and the folks leaving prison around reentry. We're also helping some prisons look at redesigning their visiting spaces to make them more child friendly. I can talk about those two for the rest of the night. I'm not going to. If you have questions, let me know. And then the other piece of what we do is really thinking about identifying and promoting. And so really thinking about all the adults that a child spends time with and how do we make sure they have some resources, they have some understanding, knowing, as you know, that we just are never clear who a child might go to for support or information or to be able to disclose to. So making sure all the adults in the child's life have some good information. So I'm going to kind of veer off my script here for not a script, but PowerPoint for just a minute. I added this slide last night because I want to think about. I went back and looked at how Kate was describing tonight, and I want to make sure we cover this information. But I also want to make sure that you can answer this. So when you log off this evening, what is it that you would like to have? Would you like? Is there a new piece of information you want? Is it just general awareness? Is a particular question you want answered? So I would love to hear from folks, and you can either, turn on your mic or put it in the chat, and we will keep talking and you can add things, but would love to know, because I want to make sure that when people log off, they say, yeah, I got what I wanted. Like I logged on for this reason and I got that. So if anyone has anything, looks like we have one person in the chat. If anybody wants to turn their mic on and add to it, we can make sure to get that covered tonight. Okay, so we're hearing some general awareness. We can definitely handle that. Anybody else have anything that they can say, hey, when I log off, I want to?
I would really like to know what steps I can do if I have a child, because I had a child with an incarcerated parent and I didn't know that there were any steps to take to make like visits happen or things like that. So I would like to know what steps I can take the next time if I have a child in that situation, because I tried everything in my power to have him do visits with his mom while she was incarcerated, and it just wasn't an option.
Yeah.
Or I kept being told that it wasn't an option. So I would like to have enough information to push back on that next time around.
Okay. And Bree, you were one of the focus groups in the spring, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. I thought I remember your name and I remembered the conversation we had. So welcome back.
Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
glad you're here.
Thank you.
So if that would be helpful for folks, I will definitely make sure to share what we've learned about visits and where maybe we haven't encountered roadblocks, but we've heard where there are roadblocks. So we'll definitely cover that. So I'm going to keep going, but if folks have other things that they want to add, like when I log off, definitely put it in the chat or turn your mic on and we will make sure. The other piece of this is a perfect example is if we don't get that covered tonight or not in enough detail, or we do and you come back and say, wow, I still have more questions. Let's figure out how to continue this conversation, because I'm going to learn as much from you about your experiences that I can then take back and say, okay, how can we figure out another path to make some of these types of things happen? So great. So I'm not going to show this video. It's linked at the bottom. It's 2 minutes. So when you have an extra 2 minutes and 4 seconds, I encourage you to watch this. You're going to hear a story. You're going to see it on the screen, and then you're going to hear the exact same story and the exact same words, but it's told in reverse. And for me, it's another pause moment. It's another moment to say, what is it that we think about children of incarcerated parents? What message do we give? What message do they take from what they're hearing from us? So I'll leave it at that, but I encourage you as part of your homework to think about watching that video. So just quickly about our children's place and sort of our perspective, just to be clear, and I share this with every group, this is one of my slides that every group gets to see, child safety is a #1 concern. I am never going to suggest that we support or encourage or make happen a visit or a phone call or a letter if it's not safe for the child, however we define safe. But that being said, I feel like there's a second part to that conversation, is that who is the person in the child's life? Who is the big person that's able to explain to the child what's going on? Because for most kids, it is not a case of out of sight, out of mind. For most kids, it's a case of is this forever? Will I ever get to see my dad again? Can I at least write him a letter or talk to him on the phone? Like, is it going to change over time? And I think for you as a group, it might be a little bit of a challenge to figure out who is that person that's able to explain to a child. What's the most appropriate way for that child to know what's going on in a way that's age appropriate? And I'll talk about that in a second. But to think about who's the big person in the child's life to answer some of those questions, or at least to do some research around that. So awareness, the number one response I get from folks across the state, from across professions. I just looked at some evaluations from a workshop we did in November, and I can't tell you how many people made a comment, which is very similar to what I hear across the board. Something along the lines of, I have never thought about children of incarcerated parents. It's not that I don't care. It's that no one has ever asked me to think about children of incarcerated parents. So I'm gonna throw down the gauntlet on that one. Like, if you haven't, can you start? If you have, which obviously someone like Bree has, like, how do we up our game? How do we get someone else to start thinking about it so that it's not just this, oh gosh, it's we're already thinking about it as we go along. In terms of messages, just a minute on this. Kids receive a lot of messages about having an incarcerated parent and what that means for them. We're told they're going to follow in their parents' footsteps, that they're just like their parent, that we've sort of given up on them because of what's happened with their parents. They may think it's their fault for what happened, that they did something, then their parent was arrested, they must have caused it. Some kids feel like there's some rite of passage, there's some glory to doing jail or prison time. So lots of messages. I think if we have the chance to counter them, we probably should. And then the final message, which some of you probably could tell this much better than I can, is that many, and I'm willing to say most children who have an incarcerated parent still love their parents. They may not like them, they may not like what they did, but they still love them. When we do Parent Day, we close with some sort of shape around the perimeter of the room. Sometimes it's a circle, sometimes it's not. And we each share what our favorite part of the day was. And across the board, kids will say that they got to spend that time with their parent, that they got to play board games and they ate lunch together and they decorated cookies and they had pictures taken, but they got to spend their time with their parent. Now, they may not like what their parent's living and they might not even like them the next day, but they still love them. But I think a second part of that for me is helping and recognizing, letting kids know, hey, we know you love your mom. We know you love your dad. For me, the second part is letting kids know that it's okay to like someone the rest of the world might not like. And my guess is you've had this experience, because what's happening is you have a child who says, I love my mom 100%. But what's swirling around that child is all kinds of really negative stuff about mom, that she's a bad person, she's a bad parent, she makes bad choices, can't get her act together, she's a screw up. And so I imagine what that's like for a child to think, well, gosh, what does that say about me if I love someone the rest of the world doesn't like? So for me, that's a two-part message. What we believe, and Bree, this might tie into some of what you're asking about. So we believe lots of things. I'm not going to bore you with that. Two, though, I want to share. One is that we do believe in relationships between children and incarcerated parents if it's safe and appropriate. And for some folks, that is a huge, huge leap. That's a big leap for some folks in DSS, for some of our judges, for guardian ad litem. It can be a big leap. People will say, no contact. That child should never see that a parent again. That child should never go to a jail, should never go to a prison. I get nervous when we make those never statements, or those all statements, because I think it means that we haven't looked at a particular situation. So if it is safe and appropriate, we believe that children have the right to visit with their parents. And we also believe in children knowing the truth in a way that's age appropriate. So what I tell a 4-year-old is much different than what I tell a 14-year-old. But if I've told a 14-year-old the truth, I can build on that over time. So as part of that, and because we've had so many really good questions about how do you tell a child the truth? How do you prepare for a visit? How do I find out where a parent is located? Lots of other sort of practical, logistical type things that I have a second PowerPoint that I put together. And I just call it my second PowerPoint. It's not cool with the graphics like this one, but it is updated on a regular basis. So as the prison system changes their mail, I update it. If we learn some new information about how to do even better visits, I do that. So I am happy to share that with folks if that might be helpful, just some of the things that we've learned. And it came out of lots of professionals saying, we wish all of that was in one place. We wish someone had 4 slides about how to prepare for a visit, or the types of questions that you should ask ahead of time. So that's a resource. I'm happy to share it with folks. And then I'm going to spend just a minute or two talking about some statistics and then thinking about impact and resources. So these are the questions that I ask anyone who's working with children and families. What do kids need? What do you need to support them? And what do parents need? And the last parents piece is the one I want to talk about because I think about this pretty broadly. So I'm thinking about parents in terms of who's caring for the child, right? So whether that's a resource family, whether that's the other parent, grandparents, regardless, what do they need? But also, what does the incarcerated parent need? And for many, this is thinking really outside the box. And I'm not suggesting that we need to get information into incarcerated parents about how to file an appeal or they had a bad judge or they didn't like their attorney, like not that, but in their role as parent, are there resources that they should be providing? I say to schools all the time, when you get your school calendar ready to go and you get it to parents, you put it on a website, how do you get a copy of that into the incarcerated parents? Otherwise, they have no way of knowing what's going on with the child's school life, right? They can't access a website. They're not going to be able to get an email. So thinking about how do we keep them engaged, especially if they were engaged prior to incarceration and if they have plans to be engaged afterwards. And there's a lot that can happen there that's not happening here in terms of, are people being notified of court dates? Are people being transported for court dates? Are people being, I mean, we have a program, a parenting program at Anson Women's Facility, and our care manager learned that one of the women in the class was told by the social worker at the prison that her parental rights have been terminated. Now, we need some verification of that, but the fact that she had to find out from a social worker at the prison, somebody who has not been involved in her case or her life at all, to suddenly get, hey, I'm calling you to my office to tell you this is what happened. I don't know any of the backstory. There's probably more to that than I don't know, but there's still a lot of work that can be done around that parent piece while they're incarcerated, that if we expect them to reconnect with families afterwards, we need to be doing a lot more, both for those with DSS involvement and those without DSS involvement. So those are the questions. Take them, look at them. You might decide, hey, is there something that we can incorporate into what we do? Is this already being covered? Is it not appropriate? I'm just going to share them with you and leave them, again, for something for you to think about. So quick look at some numbers. Nationally, we're talking about 2.7 million children. I always joke, I'm not sure if it's a joke, but I don't know what 2.7 million looks like. I don't have 2.7 million of anything, but I do know what 1 in 28 looks like because I imagine a classroom. And I imagine this time of the year that we've got a full classroom, 28 children or students in seats, and one child has an incarcerated parent. And then I think about a traditional school in July, classroom's empty. I imagine 28 seats and one is filled. And that is that child with an incarcerated parent. So little purple flower there. It's just kind of a reminder of, hey, this could be some homework for you. Again, we have several counties represented here tonight. So what does that look like in your county? If you did some quick math, if you know the enrollment numbers in the school district, what does 1 in 28 look like? Because if we talk about 1 in 28, that's one in one classroom. How many classrooms in a school? How many schools in a district? So if you look down at the middle there where it says North Carolina on the map, obviously, we are very fortunate. The Department of Adult Correction, DAC, the folks who run our prisons, they do an annual children's report for us. And it's just called that, Children's Report. It's essentially a point in time count where they say, of the men and women who are sitting in our prison on a certain day, this year I think it was January 24th, how many of them have self-reported they have minor children? And that's where that almost now 21,000 number comes from. Those are the number of children that they self-reported. Now, for any of you who have done data collection, self-report means I can report or I cannot report, and there's no consequence. So I always say it's the best number we have, but it's not the best. Lots of reasons why people might not share that information when they go to prison. And it doesn't include kids whose parents are sitting in jail, parents who are sitting in a state system in a different state, and parents who are sitting in our federal prisons. Best number we have, not the best. But at the bottom there, in particular for this group, I want to share, there's a link there to the Annie Casey Foundation, really good resources, but they encourage states to also look at how many kids have ever had an incarcerated parent. So not necessarily just today, what is it, February 15th, is my parent incarcerated, but any time from birth to 18. those numbers skyrocket, as you can imagine. And one of the reasons I point that out is just to remind all of us that just because the incarceration is over doesn't necessarily mean the impacts are over. So you might have a parent who is not able to get a job because they now have a criminal record. That has an impact on children. You might have parents who are home from jail or prison, but cycle in and out because of things going on. Impacts continue. You might have a child whose parent is facing deportation. So the end of a jail or prison sentence is the end of that system, but now families are involved in what I think is an even more complicated system. So a reminder to us that just because the parent has come home, we can't necessarily say, oh, we're done, right? Families moved on, because in many cases, they're still dealing with ongoing impacts and consequences for that parental incarceration. So this is a breakdown. This is not a new slide. I mean, it's been updated, but it's new. I've just started including it, and the source is linked at the bottom. But this takes that 1 in 28 and now breaks it out based on race, which now it looks a lot different. When we think about 1 in 28, what does that look like depending on the race of the child? So again, some more information for you to come back to kind of think about what does that mean with families and children you've worked with currently, in the past, and going forward. So I'm going to lighten things up just for a minute, and then I'm going to pause to check on our chat. So I want to share a resource with you that you might be familiar with. I know you all know Sesame Street, but a few years ago, Sesame Street launched a new toolkit and introduced a new Muppet. His name is Alex. He's that orange Muppet in the middle of your screen with that shock of blue hair, and his dad is in jail. And so they developed this toolkit for kids, caregivers, and parents. It's available in English and Spanish, and it's designed for kids 3 to 7, 3 to 8. We've used it at Parent Day with older kids and just said something like, hey, I know you're too old for Muppets, but so much of what Alex talks about, even older kids can relate to, and you can start a conversation with that. So this is something that I'm happy to send it to folks. If you're interested, my contact information there is at the bottom. You can put something in the chat or send me an email. I can send it to a work address, home address, post office, street address, wherever you get your mail, but I do need a physical mailing address for you. This is sort of a multi-part slide. At the bottom, there's a link to Sesame Street and Communities, other really good resources that you might be interested in, and it divides it into providers and parents or families. So I would encourage you to think about that. And then when this toolkit first came out, they included a CD, which seems ancient at this point, right? Like CDs, how do those work? They don't include that anymore, but there's a video that goes with it. You can actually see it online. And in the video, early on, you meet Sophia, who is a non-Muppet. She's a human. And she tells Alex that she can appreciate what he's going through because her dad was in prison or jail when she was growing up. And about 3/4 of the way through the video, he says to her something along the lines of, the kids are teasing him and they're saying things like, oh, you're going to be just like your dad. You're going to go to jail. She said, Alex, I'm so sorry that's happening to you. And I hope that it stops. But if it doesn't, I hope you'll come tell me or another adult. And that is my favorite phrase, or another adult, because I just think about it, folks. That's us. Right? I mean, wouldn't it be amazing if the Alex of the world had the Zoom link, logged on, and looked around this virtual room and said, oh, here are the other adults. Here are the people who are good listeners, who might not be experts, but they can help me find answers to my questions. And they understand that I love my mom 100%. With all fibers of my being, I love my mom. But I am really upset that she's going to miss my basketball game on Saturday. That they understand that I can have both of those emotions at the same time and probably everything else in between. So if you're interested, again, make it a homework assignment. Let me know. I'm happy to send it off to you. I'll probably do a post office run next week so I can get it to you pretty quickly. So I'm going to hit pause. I'm going to check on the chat, and I'm also going to see if anyone has a question and or would like to share some homework. Anyone want to share homework, or does anyone have a question? And I see we have another thing in another piece in the chat. So thinking about how communication works, so we can talk about that. Okay, so I'm going to keep going and we'll talk a little bit about the communication piece in just a second. Sorry about that. So this, another resource at the bottom, the article is linked. We are not collateral consequences. This is written by a fairly young professional whose mother was in prison when she was growing up. And for me, this is one, again, pause and come back and look at it. And I would encourage you to read the article. It's relatively short, but she does a great job of really explaining that we're talking about children, right? They're not collateral consequences. They're human beings. They're children, and they're feeling the effects of this. But for me, I really like this graphic that goes with the article because this, for me, has nothing to do with kids going to visit or talking to mom on the phone or writing letters. This is kids are involved in systems. They didn't choose to be part of systems, but they're part of systems. Systems have impacts, and kind of where do each of us fit into all of this? And the one at the bottom, which I think probably most of you would feel like you would fit into, is I expanded, broadened it. Instead of saying changing caregivers, I say changing relationships, which would include caregivers. But I think about a child and the relationship with the incarcerated parent. It's probably going to change when the parent leaves, may change again if they're reunited afterwards, but also changing relationships, as it says, with the caregiver. So who's caring for me now, right? Is this permanent? Is it temporary? Is it going to change again? Will it change when my parent is released? And then also changing relationships with siblings, which I think sometimes we overlook. So am I part of a family and we're getting split up? Are we staying together? Are we split up and then coming back together? So for a child, I think they're looking at potentially 3 changing relationships. And what does that mean in terms of stability, and wondering what's going on in their lives, and who are the people they've turned to in the past, and are those people still part of their lives going forward? So again, I encourage you to come back and look at this and just think about, yeah, kids are involved in lots of systems, and what happens with that, the impacts when their parent goes to prison, and then if their parent is released, what it looks like there. So just some quick thoughts here on emotions and reactions. And my guess is that you're going to look at these and say, oh, yeah, either I've seen those or I can imagine what they might look like. I'm going to encourage you then to think about that with that perspective of having that incarcerated parent. So I talked about shame and stigma. And the reason it says article after that is I have a really interesting article with some research done with adults whose parents were incarcerated when they were children. And it's, for me, it was just fascinating to read about how quickly they could go right back to thinking and talking about the shame and stigma that they experienced. Unfortunately, I don't have the link. I can send you the article, but I don't have a link to put in there. So if you're interested, let me know. And then the conspiracy of silence. So this starts with families deciding not to tell a child the truth. And then the child, so there's no conversation. They're told something else. Your parent's been deployed, they're caring for a sick relative, they've moved out of town, they've died, the list goes on. And then children find out. Either someone told them, they went online and found something, they overheard a conversation, and now they're told, we don't talk about it. So the conspiracy continues. And so you have, I think of the Alex of the world who are sitting in school every day thinking, I'm the only one having this experience, right? Because nobody else is talking about it, when in fact, other kids probably are. So again, that's not a dig against families. Families make decisions about telling the truth based on a variety of circumstances at the time. My concern is always that kids are going to find out the truth, and then when they do, what's the reaction? Are we going to have to repair some damaged relationships? Because kids will say things like, you always told me to tell the truth. What else have you told me that wasn't truthful? Why should I believe you in the future? So that goes back into that whole thing about telling a child the truth and whose job is it. If kids don't know the truth, they are going to develop and come up with their own truth, right? Something has to fill that void about, well, where's my parent? Where did they go, right? And they're going to fill in that, and they're going to base it on what someone told them at school, what they saw on TV, what's available online, and they're going to fill that in. So if we also think again about some other feelings, and again, you're going to look at these and say, yep, I've seen that. I know what that looks like. Guilt, this goes back a little bit to kids feeling like it's their fault for what happened, but also on the other end, kids feeling a little bit guilty about, hey, parent's going to be back home, right? Their parents going to be back in my life, and I love my parent, I love my dad 100%. I'm just not sure I'm ready to have him back in my life. Like life has been better while he was gone. It didn't feel as chaotic. I wasn't worried about what was happening, but now I'm feeling guilty because I'm supposed to be welcoming back with open arms. It's one of the reasons why, as we talk about reentry, is really helping folks to understand what does it mean for children. So I want to put at the bottom about the sort of saming. So assuming or making an assumption that every child with an incarcerated parent experiences all of these feelings all the time at the same level. And we know that kids are unique, right? So that even within the same family, kids might be having different reactions to what's happening. And then also just a reminder, as I'm sure many of you have seen with, as you've been working with children and families, is that families and stories look different from year to year, right? I think the pandemic is a perfect example of what did our life look like in 2020 and what does it look like now in 2024. So it's not the same. Things change over the years, and it may be that kids' feelings and reactions to what's going on, to what is going on, will change as well. So I'm going to go back to the comment in the chat about communication, and I'm not sure. I think maybe it was Hannah who asked the question. I'm assuming you mean about communication between a child and the parent who's in jail or prison. So I'm assuming that if that's not the case, let me know. So a couple of things. The PowerPoint, the second PowerPoint that I have does have some information there about asking what types of things are available through a jail or prison. And this ties into my first bullet here about language. So, and this might be really old information for people, but just to be clear, jails are locally run, usually by a sheriff. We all pretty much have a jail in our community. They're intended to be for folks who are awaiting trial, can't make bail, or serving a short sentence. Not always the case, but that's what they're intended to be. And so it means that people may not be there very long. So I think can be an extra challenge for visits or phone calls or letters, because people say, well, they're not going to be there very long, so we shouldn't even bother. Prisons are intended to be for people who are sentenced, are serving longer sentences. So you may reduce that barrier. There may not be that sense, but I also think people feel like that kids should not go visit in jail or prison. So I think if we think about communication, one is to be really clear, jail or prison. And I think out of respect for families, we should know where their loved one is, knowing that sometimes people start out in jail and then move to a prison. But I think in terms of communication, that would be the first piece, is figuring out, are they in jail or prison? And then figure out what jail or prison they're in, because jails are, as I said, locally run, and they're going to have different rules depending on where you are, who's running it. If it's a small jail, it's a big jail, how the sheriff feels, how the jail administrator feels. So then it's figure out where that person is. If they're in a jail, then let's go to the website, find out what they have for information, if anything, about mail and phone calls and visits. Prison system, it is centralized in terms of you can go to the website and look up about mail, visits, and phone calls. But even within individual prisons, they're going to have slightly different rules. And I'm a big believer in let's call the prison, ask them to send whatever information about the rules, and then also call the day before and just verify that things haven't changed, that they aren't shut down because, not even COVID, but because they've had an outbreak of something else, or there's some other reason why a visit can't happen. I would hate to get a child prepared for a visit only to find out when you get there, like, oh, sorry, someone messed up the day, right? You actually can't do that day. So in communication, for me, it would be multi-step. Is it a jail or prison? What jail or prison? And then start to go to websites and make some phone calls to figure out about that. And then in that second PowerPoint, there's information about the prison system, about mail. So I think phone calls are probably the easiest, or probably mail's the easiest, then phone calls, and then visits. And then for visits, then we're going to have a conversation about who's taking the child, who has to sign off on the child going to visit. Is there anything in place that says that parent can't have contact with the child? So those definitely get a bit more complicated around visits. And then I would also ask whether the child can have physical contact with the parent, or whether it's a non-contact behind glass type of visit. Even in some of our prisons, there may not be any glass there, but they may only be allowed to hug at the beginning and the end. And that for me is part of preparing a child. Like, if a 4-year-old sees mom, right, they're more than likely going to run up to her and want to hug and be close to her. And then to have someone say, oh, you can't do that. I just think that's really unfair for a 4-year-old to understand, well, why? She's right there. Why can't I sit on her lap, give her a hug, wrap my arms around her? So some of that, I mean, a lot of that is in that second PowerPoint about kind of getting ready for that. So again, I think it was Hannah who wrote that question. Let me know if that was on track, way off track, if you're looking for something else. So a couple more take action steps. I'm not going to go through all of these, or a couple I just want to point out. The language piece I already mentioned, jail versus prison, out of respect for families. Let's just figure that out. And then the other piece of language, and there's a link to an article there called Words Matter, is how we refer to the parents. I have a list of about 13 different words that describe people in jail or prison, and you all know them. We call them cons and convicts and inmates and perpetrators and perps and offenders, and the list goes on. And then when people are released, we put X in front of them. And for most of us, X in front of a title, it does not enhance it at all, right? It oftentimes comes across as a negative. So I always remind folks, two parts. One is the language we use when we talk to children. So we're talking about parents. We're talking about moms and dads and mummies and daddies and whatever words and titles and terms kids use. So when we talk to children, but also the conversations they overhear, right? My guess is all of you know of a situation where a child was like a sponge, right? Somebody swore in front of a child and you didn't know it until 3 weeks later, all of a sudden the child swears and you're like, oh my gosh, where did you learn that? Well, kids are sponges, right? They soak that in. And so if you start referring to their parent as something else, using a word like convict or inmate or perpetrator or offender, what does that mean for the child? How do you view them if they're the parent, if they're the child of that parent? Together Apart is another resource for you. It's not linked here, but I can send it to you. It's a list of activities that kids and parents can do while they're separated because of incarceration. But it's actually put together by 5 families with lived experience. And when you look at the list, you'll probably see things that even if it's not incarceration, that's the cause of separation, there may be activities that kids and parents can do together apart. So I'm thrilled that we have it. I'm thrilled that we had families to help us put that together. So again, might be a homework assignment for you. I mentioned reentry. I've mentioned reentry several times now. If this is a conversation you're looking to have, to check in with the folks doing reentry work in your community and to say, hey, are you including children and families in the conversation about reentry, and encouraging them to do that. That's part of my mission for 2024 is reentry folks are doing amazing work around helping people find jobs and housing and access to education and other services, but to think about children and families. What does that mean to have that person, if not back in the home, at least back in the community? And the Bill of Rights, I'm going to share, actually, it's on the next slide in a much bigger version. So it's actually the screenshot of our homepage. This is a 2-for-1 slide. So there's the Bill of Rights. It is not a legal document. You can't be held accountable if you don't follow it. And you might be thinking, wow, 8 more things to do. We can't do 8 more things. But I always encourage groups to find the one that is a good fit for you. So number 4 is probably one of my favorites. I have the right to be well cared for in my parents' absence. I mean, child well-being and children being well cared for is what you do, right? It's why you signed up for this, I'm assuming. So I don't think it's that big of a leap. I think the piece that we're adding is how do we ensure they're well cared for while their parent is incarcerated, right? In terms of that absence. So again, another resource, look at it. Sometimes it's a way to start a conversation. Sometimes people say we're going to focus on 4, but some of those other things might come about as a result of working on 4. And then again, 2-for-1. So there's a drop down there. Those are the 4 book lists we have on our website. We update on a regular basis. I won't put a book on there unless I've read it, which doesn't mean they're all good books. It just means I've read them all. So if you are looking for a recommendation and or if you have a recommendation, let me know. Always looking to add to it. But again, thinking about, are there books there that you could share with a child, or share that book list with someone else, some other organization, or within FFA, or is it the type of thing where you can check with your library? Like lots of places there to make sure that kids have access to books where characters are going through a similar experience. So something else to think about there. Another resource for the month of October, but great resources year round. It's the National See Us Support Us campaign. Last year, so October of 2023, the focus was on reentry. They changed the topic, of slight variation every year. We've been part of it for the past probably 6 or 8 years. So again, really good resources, lots of them pulled together from and with youth with lived experience. So I encourage you to click on that link. It's down there at the bottom. And the site stays live year round. So even though October has come and gone, it's still there for folks to be able to look at. So I'm going to check. We have one more chat. Oh, sorry, Hannah, for asking you, assuming it was you. I clearly was not paying attention to the name. So before we wrap things up, I'm going to check to see if one person would like to share their homework and to see if anyone has any questions. Anyone want to share their homework?
Can I
Okay.
get clarification on what you
Yeah.
mean about like with regards to homework? I know you referenced it earlier, but do you mean like things we plan on doing in the coming days, or?
Yeah, I'd love for you, if you feel comfortable, I'd love for you to share, just because I know that when people share, other people say, oh, right, yeah, I was thinking the same thing, or I hadn't thought about that. So like, what has your wheels turning that you think you might do something about? It doesn't have to be in the next few days. I mean, it could be 6 weeks down the road, but how are your wheels turning?
Yeah, I wish. I know you say that everybody says this, that they wish they knew what they know in this seminar. But I said this when we did the focus group. I wish I had like pushed harder because there were like virtual visit options for the county jail that his mother was in. And it was around Christmas, and she had not seen him for months.
Mm.
And I kept getting pushback from DSS saying that like there weren't any funds to like cover the cost or whatever. And then I had said that like we would cover the cost ourselves. And then they didn't know like how they would facilitate that and da 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 da. And I wish I had pushed harder. So I feel like moving forward, if I have a child in that situation again, I feel like having the Bill of Rights and things like that, or having like a resource I can show to, like, hey, this is an organization who is doing this with a bunch of children. I don't understand why we can't enforce it for this child in this circumstance. So I feel like that is something that I want to do in the future. And I
Okay.
have a lot of regrets about the fact that I wasn't able to do it for him when I had him.
So you've got my wheels turning, and I'll just say it. I know you can't tell people don't have regrets. Like, that doesn't work, right? You have them. I can't tell you not to have them, but I mean, we are just talking about broken systems, right? I mean, all over the place, broken systems. And it can feel like, oh my gosh, we are trying to take on broken systems that just seem to have spun out of control. So again, I can't tell you not to have regrets, but the fact is, going forward, things are going to be different, right? Like, you have a much different perspective, kind of different and better and stronger questions to ask for that. And what I will say to all of you is, if you encounter that, right, if you're getting some pushback, we would love to be part of that conversation, because part of what we put together for the training for the prison staff was the reasons why we should be supporting relationships, right? And why it's important for that. And so I would be happy to share that with anyone at DSS, guardian ad litem, a judge, like any of those folks, to say, like, part of this, I'm convinced, part of the reason we don't see those things happen is because it's the adults, right, who don't want them to happen. It's too scary. They don't know what to expect. They've never been to the jail. They make lots of assumptions. They think that what they saw on TV yesterday is the reality. And so I feel like so I put that out to any of you. Call me or email if you're running into that, and let's figure out how we can tag team to say, things can be done differently. How can we figure this out? I mean, this whole thing about there's no money for virtual visits, just like, that's the whole point of virtual visits, right? Is that there's no travel, right? Like, what is it going to be, $9.95? Like, let's chip in and do $9.95 so this child gets to see their mom over Christmas. Like, to me, that just seems like, but again,
That
if
was the frustration that I had with it, because they paid a social worker to drive to another county to see her at the county
right,
jail, to check in with her for her case.
right,
So like they would pay me to travel to bring him to a visit with his mom if she was out, and they would do that like every 2 weeks because that's when her visits were. And so the fact that she was incarcerated, they weren't paying us for any of those visits or mileage. So like I think the number was like $8. And I was so frustrated because I was like, I would pay that
right.
100%. I would pay that for my kiddo to see his mom.
Yeah,
And then it kind of came down with like, well, we can't facilitate, like, how do we do? And so, yeah, having an organization that has done it before will be so much more helpful the next time around, because I'll know exactly, because with everything else that I've received pushback on, I was like, well, this works, so let's do that instead.
yeah,
So I'm excited. Not that I would want to, not that I would wish that I would have a child with an incarcerated
right,
parent, but
right. Yeah,
even just to come in contact with another, like if I'm talking to someone else who is a kinship provider or something like that, and they're coming up against that issues, it's nice to be able to cite like, this is people who can actually help in this situation.
yeah,
And I'm excited about that.
So I always come back to we do the best that we can with the information that we have at the time. And then when we know better, we do better. And that's kind of where I feel like a lot of us are at. Like some of us have had kids that had incarcerated parents. We did the best we could, but we didn't know better. But now that we do know better, we can do better. And I will say, Melissa and I have had conversation about bringing this or a similar presentation, but doing it again for professionals. So if you are working with a social worker that maybe would be interested in attending this type of a webinar, but for the professional side, that is something we're in conversation about and hoping to do moving forward, just so that we're addressing it on the professional side of things too, because a lot of the roadblocks are with our professionals that maybe just aren't informed and don't know that it's even an option. Because in my personal case, that was the situation, was the social worker just didn't know. So the more we can educate our workers, the better it will be too. But I do know that it's 8:31, so I'm gonna let Melissa wrap up here.
yeah.
Just to be respectful of time. So
Yeah, so this is my last resource, but a series of documentaries made by youth with that lived experience. So there's one in particular, this is one of the early ones, but there's one in particular where they interview grandparents. So the grandparents of the children, and then they talk with the children. And it's, for me, very interesting because the grandparents say, well, of course we're going to take care of our of the grandkids. We're not going to get them caught in the system, but that's really not what we had planned at this point in our lives. And the kids say, we love the fact that our grandparents are caring for us, but we really want our parents caring for us. We want our grandparents to be our grandparents. So for me, just sort of interesting to look at it from that perspective. So I would encourage you, again, linked at the bottom, some really great documentaries to take a look at. And then, except for a carrier pigeon, these are all the ways that you can reach me, or you can go through Kate. She's got all my information, but there's my information in terms of phone, email, go through Facebook, go through our website. And then my two final homework suggestions are, what does continuing the conversation look like? Is it something that we're interested? How does that work for your particular organization individually and as a group? And then my guess is, even with a small but mighty group here tonight, like some of you have somebody who's whirling around your brain. You're thinking, I need to tell so-and-so about this. I need to share this and invite somebody else, some other organization, some other part of my community to be part of this conversation. So who is that person that you would like to connect with about this conversation? So I'm going to do a quick check on the chat. Now, Hannah, I know you wrote this one, right? Yes, because I can see, I'm paying attention. So yeah, Hannah, let us know about the DSS piece. We've done a fair number of workshops for Guardian Ad Litem. far fewer for DSS. And as you can imagine, we got some folks who were on board, 2 thumbs up, and then other people who sat with crossed arms and said, we don't need to listen to this, and then everything in between. So I'm excited to think that maybe we could have some really good conversations with them. So again, thank you for carving out part of your evening. I know schedules are super busy and it's bath time and bedtime and all the other times. I appreciate it. And Kate, thank you for making all
Yeah,
this happen. Appreciate it.
Melissa, my only question for you, you had mentioned your second PowerPoint a couple of times. Is it an option to send that out as well with these slides, just so people can
Yep.
kind of look at some of those steps and contact
Yeah.
info, things like that?
And like I said, that second PowerPoint, I update every time I get new information. So if you look at it and say, oh, here's something I learned that should be in there, please let me know. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Like, it's not a carved in stone document. Would love to add to it. So yeah, I'll
Awesome.
send you both. Yep.
Great. So just so everyone else knows, I will send you your certificates. And it may not be tonight. I'll hold off on sending your certificates until I have all the links, and I'll send it all together. But it'll be very soon. I created the certificate already. So we have them ready to go. So if you're like in a hurry and like need it for your agency, like right now, let me know. I can give you yours, but otherwise I'll just wait and send everything all at once so you're not getting multiple emails. Because if you're like me, you don't check every single email anyways. So save your inbox a little bit. But thank you so much for being here, Melissa. Really grateful for the work that you do and the education you provide. And thank you everybody else for taking time to be with us. I'm going to stop recording, but I'll stay on for a few minutes in case anybody has questions. But if you need to sign off, totally understand. And again, thanks for being here.